This past May, Rabbi Peltz and I joined the Philadelphia Board of Rabbis in viewing an exhibit at the National Museum of American Jewish History. The title of the exhibit was "The Future Will Follow the Past," a statement which seems true by definition. It's the type of assertion about which the Talmud would say, pshita, simple, obvious. It's like saying duh, or in what I'm told is the more up-to-date slang for texting, obvi. The future will follow the past. Obvi. Obviously true, chronologically, as surely as tomorrow will follow today. But the logo for the exhibition prints the title in a circular form. And in that representation, the future will follow the past suggests inevitability. What happened in the past is destined to be repeated again and again. Do you believe that? Is that your experience? To be sure, there are examples of this somewhat cynical perspective in Jewish thought. Kohelet, the book of Ecclesiastes, which we read on Sukkot, proclaims, Ein kol chadash tachat hashemesh. There is nothing new under the sun. Utter futility, said Kohelet. All is futile. One generation goes and another comes, but the earth remains the same forever. Only that shall happen which has happened. Ein kol chadash tachat hashemesh. So much for saying Happy New Year. But the truth is, we all feel this way from time to time, and maybe a lot these days. The future will follow the past. One of the items in the exhibit, which by the way was the work of a Jewish artist, Jonathan Horowitz, looks like a giant black garbage bag, maybe 15 feet high and 10 feet wide, tied at the bottom. It depicts the statue of Confederate General Robert E. Lee as it appeared covered by a black tarp after the August 2017 violent Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia. I'm sure you all remember that event. Listen to what Jonathan Horowitz said about that piece. There were white supremacist Klansmen, neo-Nazis marching openly in the 21st century to make claim to a white nation in which African Americans and Jews have no part. For me, he said, the chant, Jews will not replace us, sent chills up my spine. The future will follow the past. Will it? Is that necessarily so? As we rabbis were contemplating these questions, the docent directed our eyes to the window just behind the Horowitz artwork, and we could see there the very top of a statue outside. And he explained that it is a work called Religious Liberty, created for the 1876 centennial of the United States by another Jewish artist, Moses Ezekiel. Born in Richmond, Virginia, Ezekiel was a loyal Confederate soldier in the Civil War. And after that, he studied art in Rome, where he carved religious liberty. Looking beyond that statue and across the street, you see the Liberty Bell, which carries the inscription from the book of Leviticus, proclaim liberty throughout the land unto all the inhabitants thereof, a statement which was a flawed reference, given that all the inhabitants thereof did not include all of the inhabitants of this newly proclaimed nation. Stunning perspective. Looking back through history, through that window from Charlottesville to the Civil War, to the Liberty Bell, to the birth of this country, will the future follow the past? Which part of the past? Hold that question. 6 years have passed since Charlottesville. In that time, we've seen attacks on the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, the Poway Synagogue near San Diego. The ADL has documented an ever-increasing number of anti-Semitic acts, and now many synagogues, including TBS, have full-time armed guards at their doors. We also do lockdown drills, which reminds me, look around for the exits nearest you. And that brings me to another incredible exhibit at the museum. A cup on a table next to a chair. They come from Colleyville, Texas. The cup is the one in which Rabbi Charlie Citron Walker offered tea to a stranger who came to the shul on Shabbat morning, January 15th, 2022. Then the stranger pulled a gun and held the rabbi and 3 others hostage. The chair is the very one that the rabbi threw at the man as he shouted, "Run!" And he and the other hostages escaped. Rabbi Citron Walker credited tactics learned in courses taught by the ADL and local police with saving their lives. Will the future follow the past? Here the question becomes even more poignant because it is clearly about values as well as events. Judaism places a very high value on welcoming strangers. It's a mitzvah that goes all the way back to our very beginnings, to Abraham and Sarah, who are credited with practicing hachnasat orchim, welcoming guests. Loving the stranger is a commandment from the book of Leviticus, only a couple of chapters after the commandment to observe Yom Kippur. We come here on the high holy days to pray for life. Zachrenu l'chaim, kodvenu b'sefer ha'chaim. Remember us for life, inscribe us in the book of life. But we also come here to assess the values by which we live our lives, the vows we make to ourselves, to others, to uphold our traditions, promises to God, kol nidre. The Al-Chet formula is traced back to the biblical book of Daniel. Our rituals have been repeated again and again for millennia. In that sense, we surely hope that the future will follow the past. But you believe that what happened in the past is destined to be repeated. I hope not, because our entire Yom Kippur ritual is predicated on the proposition that we can change. Just before Kol Nidre, we recited the line, "By the authority of the heavenly court and the earthly court, we grant permission lehit palel im ha'avaryanim," usually translated, to pray with those who have transgressed. Who are these avaryanim, these sinners? Some say it's a reference to the conversos during the Spanish Inquisition. Others say that the sinners are the people sitting right next to us in the pews. I caught you looking at your neighbor. Well, according to Nitivot Sholom, a century-old Hasidic commentary, the term avaryanim comes from the Hebrew word avar, meaning past. Thus, the sin that we must confront prior to any others is the sin of saying there is no possibility of change. The future will follow the past. It's locked in, inevitable. Al chet shechatanu lefanecha. We confess our sins and we resolve to do better in the year ahead, precisely so that the future does not follow the past. Still, as we come together tonight to begin Yom Kippur, we're suffused in the past, in history, ancient and recent, as Jews and as Americans. Which part of the past and which values are we to follow? Which precedent takes precedence? As we continue to ponder all this, there's one more piece of history I think we must consider on this Yom Kippur in particular. This year marks the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War. How many of you are old enough to remember the Yom Kippur War? Yeah. Rabbi Peltz and Rabbi Wexler weren't born yet. Kinter Cohen was a baby. I'm the only AK, the only Alta Cocker among the clergy on the Bima tonight, old enough to remember. And I want to thank you guys for making me feel my age. At this hour in 1973, the war had not yet begun, but the scene was set. The Egyptians had prepared an assault across the Suez Canal, 100,000 soldiers and 1,350 tanks. Facing them, Israel had only 450 soldiers spread out in 16 outposts along the length of the canal and only 90 tanks. My friend Uri commanded 4 of those tanks, defending 1 outpost. His tank would be the only one to survive the onslaught. On the Golan Heights, the Syrians had massed 28,000 troops and 800 tanks, while Israel had only 3,000 troops and 180 tanks. The Syrians and the Egyptians attacked at 2 p.m., 7 a.m. here on the U.S. East Coast. On that morning of Yom Kippur 1973, Jane and I knew nothing about any of this. We were graduate students at Brandeis and teaching interns at Knesset Israel Synagogue in Brookline. Our assignment for that day was junior congregation. It was late in the morning when word trickled down from the main service. Israel was fighting for its life. We walked home to my apartment and turned on the radio. I didn't have a TV. There was limited news. We didn't realize how close Israel was to being completely overrun. We didn't know how catastrophic the losses would be for Israel. 2,600 killed, 7,500 wounded. To put that into perspective, the total population of Israel at that time was 3.5 million. It's as if the United States, which had a population of 300 million, were to lose 260,000 lives, more than half the total the US lost in World War II, but in only 18 days. Numbers can be abstract. A story comes much closer to capturing the emotion of what happened. Rami Svet is a veteran of the Yom Kippur War who has met with several of our TBS groups on the Golan Heights at the site of a decisive battle in which he fought. The place is called Emek HaBacha, the Valley of Tears, because of the catastrophic losses Israel suffered in stopping the Syrian tanks. As our group sat there, he shared his story. His parents, Tzvi and Ruth, made Aliyah from Europe before World War II. They would lose their entire families in the Holocaust. They married after the war and had children. All the boys served in the Armored Corps. Yair, the middle son, was a platoon commander. Rami, the youngest, was a newly minted officer. On the eve of the war, they were called up to the Golan. Rami says, "I knew that Yair was in the area, but I didn't know exactly where. Only later, I learned that he was a few hundred meters away from me in the valley." Rami's tank was hit, causing him to temporarily lose his vision. At the hospital, he heard one of the wounded say that a company commander had been killed. Someone asked the commander's name, and the man answered, "Svet." That's how Rami found out that his brother Yair had been killed. The tank in front of Yair's on the slope was hit. The soldiers jumped out. Yair went to rescue them, A shell struck, and he was killed. At that point in the narrative, I stopped Rami to ask where it happened in relation to where we were sitting. He pointed to a shrub a couple 100 feet away, right there. And where were you, I asked. He pointed to a spot just behind where we were seated. He had seen it happen, but didn't know at the time that it was his brother. Rami wanted to go back to the battle, but was denied permission for fear that his family would sustain 2 losses. So he went to tell his parents what happened. My mom had 2 requests, he recalls. One, even though I just told her she had lost a son, that I go back to the front, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to look my friends in the eye. The second, to find my father and tell him. Rami found his dad, and as he remembers it, Dad made a tear, kriya, in my jumpsuit, gave me a hug, and said, go back. Tonight, I think it's particularly important that we hear such a story and remember. Tomorrow we will remember in another way, based on another story. One kibbutz, Beit Hashita, suffered more losses per capita than any other community. When the war ended, 11 small army trucks pulled through the kibbutz gates, headlights on even though it was daytime. Each bore 1 coffin. The dead soldiers were the kibbutz's next generation, young workers and fathers. For that small, tightly knit community, nearly an incomprehensible loss. 17 years later, an Israeli songwriter wanted to create some memorial music to commemorate those who had been lost. At first he thought he would write music for Kol Nidre, new music, but then, looking through the Machzor, he came to Unatana Tokef, which frames the awesome holiness of the day and the frailty of life, who shall live and who shall die. But the text has another powerful phrase that became a repeated refrain. Uvashofar gadol yitaka, v'kol dmama daka yishama. The great shofar is sounded, a still small voice is heard. And for a number of years now, that is the melody written as a memorial for the Yom Kippur war losses of Beit HaShibta that Cantor Cohen chants, and we all join in its refrain.
ושופר גדול ייתקע, וקול דממה דקה יישמע, ומלאכים יחפזון, וחיל רדה יאחזון, ומלאכים וחיל רדה יאחזון, ובשופר גדול ייתקע, וקול דממה דקה יישמע.
When we hear that Unatana Tokef tomorrow, we'll remember the Yom Kippur War, and then reflecting on that, realize that Israel is still fighting for its life, still sending its young men and women to the army, wondering, Mi yichyeh u'mi yamut, who shall live and who shall die. So will the future follow the past? Today, the enemies are different. Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, terrorists, indiscriminate attacks on Israeli civilians, men, women, and children. Yes, Israel is still fighting for its existence. But on this Yom Kippur, there is another battle going on, a battle about values. People like Rami Svet and my friend Uri, who fought in the Yom Kippur War, have joined hundreds of thousands seeking to protect Israel's democracy from an extreme right-wing government that wants to curtail the power of the Supreme Court. A government in which the foreign minister wants to remove the clause of the law of return that extends protection of citizenship to any person with one Jewish grandparent, a law that was created as a reaction to the Holocaust when one Jewish grandparent was enough to condemn you to death, a clause enacted to protect those of Jewish descent in countries like Russia and the Ukraine, a law that would protect intermarried and assimilated Jews even in this country. Israel's government includes religious extremists who promote hatred of their fellow Jews, who would call our services at TBS an abomination. And against all of this, the demonstrators have sounded a great shofar in the hope that their fellow citizens and Jews around the world would hear the still small voice of God-inspired Jewish values as enunciated in Israel's Declaration of Independence. The state of Israel will be based on precepts of liberty, justice, and peace taught by the Hebrew prophets, will uphold the full social and political equality of all its citizens without distinction of race, creed, or sex, will guarantee full freedom of conscience, worship, education, and culture. Our call goes out to the Jewish people all over the world to rally, to stand by us in the great struggle for the fulfillment of the dream of generations, the redemption of Israel. So now, what about that statement, the future will follow the past? Of course it will. But the question is, which parts of the past? And that is not at all a matter of inevitability. That is precisely the question that Yom Kippur would have us consider, individually and as a people, through our prayers and our confessions. And that brings me to a confession. When I first heard that title, The Future Will Follow the Past, before I even set foot in the Museum of American Jewish History, I thought about something I learned from Rabbi Harold Kushner, Zichrono Livracha. He was on my mind because he had passed away just a month before the exhibit. Rabbi Kushner is best known as the author of the book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. He also wrote the commentary in the Eitz Chaim Chumash that we use to follow the Torah service every Shabbat. In addition, Rabbi Kushner often wrote essays which inspired high holiday sermons by a whole host of rabbis, myself included. See if you remember this thought-provoking riddle from Rabbi Kushner that I shared with you back in 2007. I didn't remember, I had to look it up. In 6 weeks, each of us will be given the opportunity to do something we have often wanted to do. For many, it will be something we have prayed for a chance to do, something we thought would make our lives significantly happier, and almost without exception, virtually every one of us will ignore the opportunity. Remember the answer? Do you remember? As Saturday night, November 4th, becomes Sunday morning, November 5th, we will change from daylight savings to standard time. We will move the clock back, and we will have the extraordinary opportunity to live 1 hour of our lives all over again. And most of us will sleep right through it. What a waste. So what do you think it would be worth to have that opportunity? Is there 1 hour of the past year you'd like the opportunity to relive, to do over? Are there words that you have said or not said, things that you've done and regret? Isn't that what brings us here on Yom Kippur, to confess, to say, Ashamnu, Slicha, forgive us, pardon us, we're sorry? We'd love to go back and get it right, to live 1 hour or even just a few moments again. But of course, that's fantasy, science fiction. You can't change the past. Or can you? According to Rabbi Kushner, it is the audacious claim of Yom Kippur that it can change the past. He explained it this way. In other civilizations, time flows from yesterday to today to tomorrow. The past shapes the present, which in turn shapes the future. Cause and effect. The future will follow the past. Not in Judaism. In Jewish tradition, it is the future which determines the present and defines the meaning of the past. How can that be? Consider. Was something a tragedy or a learning experience? Only the future can tell. Was a harsh word a slip of the tongue or a pattern of behavior? Depends on what you do tomorrow. The meaning of history is decided by what follows, personal and national. Are racism and anti-Semitism the legacy of this country, or is it the words on the Liberty Bell? The future will decide that. No, we cannot go back and change what occurred. There are no time machines that can cut across the space-time continuum. However, our vision of the future, of the type of world we want, can change how we live today, and that will determine the meaning of the past. No, we cannot go back and undo the Holocaust. Would that we could. There is no way to bring back the 6 million martyrs of our people. No more than we can bring back those that we recall in the martyrology as we recite tomorrow afternoon. Ela Ezkara recalls the loss of our homeland and the Hadrianic persecutions by the Romans 2,000 years ago. But it is not the final word on Jewish history and experience. Neither was the Holocaust. All those lost lives take on new meaning with the birth of the modern state of Israel. Sacrifices were not in vain. Neither Hitler nor Hadrian, neither the Nazis nor the Romans put an end to Jewish life or Judaism. Israel's back on the stage of world history. But will it stay there? That is up to us. Did the Holocaust create a lasting change in Jewish history, in the Jewish psyche? Is never again simply a slogan or a statement of fact? And what ideals and values will Israel represent? None of that is determined by history. It's not simply the past determining the present. Only continuing support of our vision of Israel, the Israel we believe in, will answer those questions. Will you support Masorti, our movement in Israel, which stands for the Jewish values expressed in Israel's Declaration of Independence? Will you make it to Israel in the next year? Will you make your presence and values felt? How often have you heard the famous quotation attributed to Herzl, Im tirtzu ein zo agada, if you will it, it is no dream? Well, consider its broader implications. The difference between a mere dream and a prophetic vision is determined by the future. And that vision of the future determines what we do today and the meaning of the past. Did the Yom Kippur War make a difference for Israel? Did Charlottesville make a difference for us as Americans and as Jews? Did Pittsburgh? Did Colleyville? Only the future will tell. Another level to all this. For how many of you have the bitter politics of recent years produced divisions in your family? Are there relatives or friends with whom you no longer speak? People who have stopped talking to you? Are you heartsick over this? Is the damage permanent, or is it a temporary hurt that can be healed? Only the future will tell. If you will it, it is no dream. Have you fulfilled all your dreams for yourself as a parent or a grandparent? What about your dreams for Jewish practice and Jewish living? Have you achieved all you hoped for in your profession or in your personal relationships as a husband or wife, partner or friend? Is any of us satisfied with the world as it is, content with this as our legacy for future generations? Or do we envision a better future? Here then is Rabbi Kushner's message for each one of us. You are not a prisoner of the past. You are the architect of your future. So yes, indeed, the future will follow the past. But what we do, how we live in the days and the years ahead, that will determine the meaning of the past for each of us individually, for the America in which we live, for Israel, for the Jewish people, for all of us. On November 5th, we changed the clocks. But on the 10th of Tishrei, Yom Kippur, we change ourselves. Do it right, and we can make the most of the past, such that we walk out of here tomorrow night as new people, the people we want to be, people who fulfill the highest ideals of our national and religious heritage, and hopefully the people that God wanted us to be all along. May that be the future which follows our past.